Well, hello fellow crafters, Janine here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to embed printed images into resin. So if you have a photograph that you don't necessarily want to use the original, but you would like to embed it in resin, say to make a coaster or to make a magnet for your refrigerator, or whatever type of paperweight, anything that you may want to print onto paper and then embed in resin does take a little bit of finessing, because resin goes through a chemical process to harden, and that chemical process causes a heating process which can fade the color in printed images. It can distort the color of the paper. There's all kinds of really crazy things that can happen, but there are some tips and tricks that you can use if you would like to embed printed images into resin. So this is a coaster that I made, and that is an image that I printed onto just regular paper, no kind of special paper, just regular paper in my laser printer. I do have a color laser printer. You can do this with inkjet. You just have to do an extra step if you use an inkjet printer. But anyway, so this is just regular paper that I've embedded in resin, and you can see the color stayed true and beautiful. So if you'd like to see how to embed printed images into resin, just stay tuned. Alright, the first thing that I need to do is to cut my images out. And the coaster mold that I'm working with, or the coaster molds I'm working with rather, are 4-inch circles. So what I need to do is, in all these nesting circle dies, is find the one that's 4 inches, and I think I have a pretty good idea. It's smaller, so I think this one was close. Okay, I think it's definitely going to be one of those two, because I made these images about 3.9 inches. So let me get my handy dandy measure out here. Okay, I think it's the smaller one. I might have made my images just a little bit too big. Okay, and this piece of paper is too big to go through my die cutting machine, so I'm just going to cut and I gotta do this several times. I'm just going to cut the excess off from around it. And I'm just going to roll it through. And there we go. I've got a perfectly cut 4-inch circle to go inside of my coaster mold. Woo, couldn't think of that. So anyway, so we're gonna go head over to the mixing and pouring. See you there. Alright, well now we're ready to get started mixing and pouring our first batch of resin. The first thing I did, you'll see right here, is a level. I want to make sure that my surface that I'm working on is level, and where I was going to be pouring the resin was level, because if it's not, you'll end up with one side of the resin thicker and one side thinner, and it just won't give you as good of a result. So I did get my table nice and level. I have a very unlevel house. I live in a very old house, and so I just put a thin board on one side of my table under the legs to raise that end, and it ended up leveling out the entire surface. And I've got two, these are either, oh I'm sorry, you can't see that. Okay, these are 3 or 4 ounce cups. Let me check real quick. Okay, I was wrong altogether. These are 5 ounce cups that I got from Walmart. They're the Great Value brand. And normally when I'm doing smaller castings, I use these to pour both of my liquids into and mix. But since I'm doing 5, I'm going to be mixing quite a bit more. So I'm probably going to be going to do my measuring. I'm going to go to this top line in the cup, right about there on each cup, and that should give me about 3 ounces of hardener and 3 ounces of resin. So I'm going to take Part A, and I'm sorry, I use the Famo Wood resin. It's cheaper than the, you get a lot more for the same price. You get about twice as much more for the same price as the other type of resins you can buy in the craft store. So I'm going to pour, or measure rather, I'm using this as a measure. You have to do equal parts. So I'm measuring out about 3 ounces of Part A and about 3 ounces of Part B, give or take. It's anywhere from 3 to 4 ounces. And what I would normally measure in is just these little cups. I'd measure an ounce of each and then pour them into one of these cups to mix them together. But since I'm doing 5, I need quite a bit more. So I'm gonna pour those together into a larger cup. And I wasn't entirely prepared when I sat down. Okay, and I'm gonna use my stir stick, and I just have a silicone stirring stick. Again, I bought from Walmart for probably around $1, because I was going through so many craft sticks doing this that this just seemed more economical and more earth friendly to reuse the same thing over and over. So I'm going to gently stir this for 2 minutes. Okay, now I'm ready to add colorant. And there's a lot of ways you could go with this. You could do glitter, you could do paint. They have special tints, inks for tinting resin. I've always used acrylic paint without any problem, without it altering the hardening of the resin. And I think the biggest thing is not to add way more than you need, just enough to achieve the color that you're looking for. So I'm going to stir that again for about a minute. And I do make sure and scrape the sides and the bottom so that everything gets mixed evenly in. And the reason I add a colorant is you're really not going to see it too much under the paper, but I try to match the same color of the paper that I'm using, or pretty much the color of the background of the image that I'm using. So that way, if the image doesn't entirely fill the area around, then this colorant will disguise that. It will give you a more even result. Now this one you can actually stir a little more vigorously, because you're really not going to, if there's air bubbles trapped, you really won't see them. This one you really just want to make sure you get the colorant mixed in good, because it won't set where there's like, if there's solid bits of colorant, the resin won't harden in that area. It'll create like a pocket. So you got to make sure and get the colorant mixed in really, really well. Kind of looks like glue at this point with that color. Okay, now we're ready to pour. And there's no hard and fast science here. It's just eyeball it and get it as even as possible. You can get these molds from Amazon. I think they're under $10 for one. You can see this one I cut up because one of the during the unmolding process, one of the end wells cracked completely open. So I just took my scissors and trimmed it up and cut it off. And then I got another one, and I think the second one I got was around $8. It wasn't expensive. There was a shortage of them for a while, and people were wanting to charge $30 and $40 for them, which I thought was crazy. And then I guess the manufacturer of them got smart and started making more of them, and then you saw the price of them come down again. Okay, and now I'm done mixing, so I'm just kind of scraping my spatula off back into the cup. And I don't throw these cups away because I can reuse them for my next pouring, to use them to measure again. So what you're going to end up with in each well is about an ounce of resin, give or take. In this case, I think it's just a scotch more. Alright, that's all we can do for now. We're going to let this set probably about 30 minutes, and I'm going to let a lot of the bubbling come to the top. And as I see bubbles on the top, I am going to go ahead and hit them with my lighter to pop them. There's other methods of doing it. You can use a straw to pop the bubbles, but you just blow through the straw onto the surface, and it causes the bubbles to rise and pop. Okay, I've let my resin set overnight, so it is nice and hard. And now I'm ready to embed the paper. So the first thing that we're going to need to do, and it's for a couple of reasons, is first off, so that the paper doesn't float, shift, or move around after we pour the second layer of resin in, is the first reason we want to make sure it's glued down to the first layer. And the second reason is because resin goes through a chemical process that causes it to heat. And in that heating process, it can discolor paper. And also, now this is more important with if you use an inkjet printer. If you use an inkjet printer, you're going to have to do this a little bit differently. Before you can pour resin over an image that's been printed on an inkjet printer, you're going to have to use a spray acrylics. Just comes in an aerosol can, just like spray paint, but it's a clear acrylic, and you're going to want to seal your paper with that first. And the reason is this is a laser toner, so it's heat set onto this paper. So this Mod Podge or Collage Podge, which is what I'm working with, is Collage Podge, is not going to cause this toner to ruin. It's not, because it's not water-based. Toner, like I said, it's heat set, so it's not going anywhere. Whereas inkjet ink, the minute you put the Collage Podge on, the ink is going to start to lift and move around on you and just make a mess. So before you can even apply Mod Podge or Collage Podge or any kind of clear coat that's water-based to inkjet ink, you're gonna need to seal it first with a clear acrylic spray. But it will work like a charm, so don't sweat it. It's gonna be just fine. And then you just want to give this a really good coat. Make sure everything is good and coated. Because again, I'm sorry, I think I didn't finish that thought process. The resin goes through a chemical heating process, and it will discolor the paper. If the paper is not completely sealed, it will discolor it. So that's why we want to make sure and take our time and seal it. Now, don't worry about brush strokes, because resin is self-leveling, which means that it is going to fill in every little nook and cranny of every brush stroke, fingerprint, everything. Right now I'm just making sure there's no bubbles under the paper. I'm just smoothing everything down and making sure it's completely coated with the Mod Podge. But yeah, the resin would cause the paper to discolor. So that's why we have to make sure it is well sealed. And you probably have to do the same thing when working with stickers. Now, they might stick to the bottom layer and not shift on you, but you're definitely going to want to seal the top of them to make sure they don't discolor. Okay, one last thing, and I do recommend this, is to take a damp paper towel or regular towel, whatever works for you, and just clean up some of the glue from the inside of the while it's still wet, because it's not going to affect anything about the setting up of the resin. But I have gotten a little carried away with my glue and then had just like a little bit of like the flakiness of the glue sticking out above where the resin casting ended. So I found that this helps to not have that. Okay, my Mod Podge or decoupage is completely dry now, so I'm ready to go ahead and do my second pouring of resin. So I'm going to do basically the same thing that I did before and use my little 5-ounce cups to measure out approximately 3 ounces of each liquid. And as I did before, we're going to stir for 2 minutes. Okay, I've been stirring the resin for 2 minutes, and the way you can tell it's done, and it's a little bit harder to see, particularly on camera in this cup, is that there's no striations of color in there, that it's one even color all the way through. And so that looks good to me. And I'm going to pour just the way I did the last time, just try and get an even pouring in each one. And basically I just pour slowly until I see that the resin goes all the way to the edge. Now I'm going to let these set for about 30 minutes and give all the bubbling a chance to rise to the surface, and then I'm going to go back over it with my lighter again and pop those bubbles. I did have a subscriber suggest to me to use my heat tool, which is a blow dryer, except it gets a whole lot hotter than that, because the force of the air blowing on it would cause the bubbles to rise, and then the heat would pop them. But the only problem with that, with this particular type of casting, is it's going to cause the resin to move and then go up the sides of the mold, and I don't want that, because then I'll have a wavy ring around the coaster, and we don't want that. We'd like a nice, because it does make just a little bit of a raised edge all the way around the coaster, and as long as we don't disturb it too much in that way, it will be even. But if I start causing the resin to push against the sides of the mold, then it's going to be more of a wavy ring around, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to give it a little bit of time, like I said, about 30 minutes, let some of that bubbling rise, and then come back with my lighter and pop any bubbles that have risen to the surface. And then I'm going to cover it with probably a very large baking pan. And the reason I do that is so that no dust, because now we got a clear coat and everything will be able to be seen, that you know, dirt or possibly like say a little bug, a gnat or something falls in it and sinks into the resin, we will be able to see it now. Whereas with the white coat, I knew that we weren't going to be seeing that, so I wasn't that concerned if any dust particles got into it. But now any little thing that gets into the surface of this will be able to be seen. So once I'm done popping bubbles, then I'm going to put like I said, a large baking pan on top of them to keep them dust free. So I'll see you when it's time to unmold. So I'm going to cut off a piece of cork. I bought this roll of cork. It was like excuse me, it was corkboard cork, like, you know, if you're making your own pin board, and so it just came in a big roll, which I cut in half because it made it a little bit easier to handle, a little bit smaller. So all we're going to do is take that same size die that we use to cut our images out of our paper with. We're going to use that same die to cut perfect circles to go on the back of our coasters. So same way you would do any die. I like to tape it down to hold it in place. Then oh, it's not, the tape's not wanting to stick. That's okay. And I'm going to turn it over and have the cut side up. I am going to adjust my dial clockwise a couple of notches for the thickness of the cork. And let's try and run it through, and if it gives me too much resistance, then I'll adjust my dial again. It's just not quite going all the way through, but it cut enough, I think, to make like a perforation. Yeah, that's good. It's going to give me a much cleaner, neater circle than if I cut it out by hand, and I can just trim off the little bits that didn't quite make it, but that's pretty darn good. That's better than any circle I could cut by hand. So I'm going to do that 4 more times, and then I'll meet you back here. Okay, so I have let these cure overnight, and I should have come back and checked them. I did check them after 30 minutes, pop bubbles, but I should have come back and checked them again because I did end up with some bubbling that's just stuck. It is what it is, but that's okay. I just think it adds to the look that it was handmade, that it wasn't something that was store-bought. But anyway, now it's time to unmold them. And with the silicone, it's easy because you just peel it back. And you can see how beautifully, or hopefully you can see in the video, just how beautifully even they are. They have an even thickness all the way across because we did pour, we did level our surface before we poured, so everything is nice and even. It's a nice thickness, and that the Mod Podge did help protect the paper and the colors, so they stayed pretty true. I think I probably should have coated it a little bit, put a second coat of the Mod Podge on, because I did get a little bit of fading here and here, but it wasn't too bad. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop all these out. Alright, this is just E6000 glue. I like using E6000 glue for this because I have never had it fail on me. I've never had it peel loose from a coaster that I've made or any other project I've made, because I do make magnets as well with the resin, and I use the E6000 glue to adhere the magnet to the back of the resin piece, and I have never ever had the E6000 glue fail on me, so that's why I like to use it. Okay, now we're just going to take the little circles of cork that we cut with our circle die, and I do think my die is just a scotch bigger than 4 inches because I did have to trim the, I did have to go with a just a little bit smaller die from my collection and trim the papers down a bit to fit inside the coaster, and I'm noticing that these these pieces of cork are overhanging a little bit, so I'm just trying to get them as even as possible because I don't think I'm going to trim them. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to leave it overhanging like that or if I'm going to trim it off. Okay, and that's it. The only thing we have left to do now is just to let this cure overnight. Again, it probably does cure just a little bit faster than that, but just to be on the safe side, I like to let them cure overnight to make sure that glue is completely set. And I really don't think I'm going to trim just that tiny little bit of excess cork off the bottom. I think I'm just going to leave it there, you know, because I really don't think it's hurting it aesthetically, and I think it really does let you know that this is a coaster. That you can set, you know, a wet drippy drink on it and everything's going to be fine. So this is it. This is how you make, this is how you embed printed images into resin so that your image doesn't get distorted, so that the colors don't fade. This is how you do it. So if you enjoyed this project and you would like to see more of my arts and crafts project, go ahead and click that subscribe button that's right about here. You can see my picture in that button. And also, if you would like to help me bring more of these type of projects to you, of course materials and supplies for arts and crafts can get a little bit pricey. If you would like to help me cover the cost of that, there's going to be an iCard right about here that is for fan funding, and feel free to donate if you feel moved to do so. If not, don't sweat it. Just your tuning in and viewing, it helps tremendously, more than you'll ever know, and I appreciate you, and I appreciate you coming and watching my videos. As always, you guys have a very blessed day. Bye now.